What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is my top 10 favorite film directors of all time. This is a video I have been looking forward to give to you guys for quite some time, but it's also a video where I knew going into it that it was going to be something that was going to be hard to rank because there's so many filmmakers that I love. But I managed to make this list, and there are a couple things that I wanted to let you guys know about so that way you can keep it in mind while you're seeing this ranking video. So if you are new to the channel, I have it where I have a director ranking series where I focus on a specific filmmaker and then I watch all their films and rank them from worst to best. I think I've done something like at least 60 plus. I've been doing it for over 5 years. So this list, this video of my favorite filmmakers, it is only going to be ones that I've seen all of their films. It will not include any filmmakers that I've only seen partial filmography of them. So for example, someone like Alfred Hitchcock, I love him. I think he's a great filmmaker, but I haven't seen all of his films, so I'm not going to include a filmmaker like him. Someone like Ingmar Bergman, I haven't seen all his films yet. I do plan to. Kurosawa. Filmmakers such as these I admire, I greatly respect, but I just haven't seen all their films, so I'm not going to include them. So this is just focused on filmmakers where I've seen all of their work and I'm like, you know what? Not only do I rewatch their past work, but I look forward to their future work. And so, again, something to keep in mind because I know that there are going to be a lot of people who are like, well, wait a minute. Why wasn't this filmmaker included? That's probably why. I probably haven't seen all of their films. So, also, one thing to keep in mind is that I think there's one or two filmmakers on here where, as of filming this video, I have filmed a ranking video of their work, but I haven't released it yet. So don't want to spoil the one or two filmmakers, but just yet, but wanted to keep you guys in the loop in terms of that. So anyways, the way this is going to work is I'm going to give you guys some honorable mentions, and then after there's honorable mentions, I'm then going to go from 10 to 1, with 1 being my favorite filmmaker of all time. So guys, enough exposition. Let's get started with my top 10 favorite film directors of all time. So the honorable mentions, starting things off, we have Michael Mann. Michael Mann, Insider, Heat, and of course Collateral, among many others. Michael Mann is a great filmmaker. He is someone that, as I mentioned earlier, he is a filmmaker that whenever he has a film come out, which unfortunately doesn't happen too often these days, but whenever he has a film come out, I always look forward to his work. I love the lighting of his films. I think that he does a great job of directing and just consistently brings about really good films. I love him as a filmmaker, and yeah, that's why he's an honorable mention. And next up, we have a director that can be quite hit or miss, but nonetheless, I'm still always looking forward to his work. And we have Ridley Scott. Blade Runner, Gladiator, Kingdom of Heaven. Kingdom of Heaven is so underrated. Ridley Scott, though, let's just face it, he is the king of the director's cut. You'll have a film of his that is great or just kind of okay, but then his director's cut comes out and it's like, oh wow, that was a great film. It happens so often, but he is really good. Again, he does have some duds here and there, but when you've been working for almost 50 years, it makes sense. But for the most part, he is someone that delivers great work, and yeah, I greatly admire Ridley Scott. That's why he's an honorable mention. Next up, this is a filmmaker that I've heard some people say they're not really a big fan of his work, and I think it's a shame because I personally really like him, obviously, but that is Darren Aronofsky. Requiem for a Dream, Black Swan, The Whale. The Whale is his latest film, and I think that it's such a great film. It was a gut punch, honestly. But he is a filmmaker that I really admire how serious his films are. Like, watching his films, yes, I know that they're very depressive, but at the same time, I feel like he just does such a great job behind the lens, and I really do admire his direction of his films. He creates films that feel very much so otherworldly, like almost like a fever dream, and I really respect that. It's something that he really is able to hijack your senses in a way to where you can't help but really find whatever it is on screen in his films fascinating. I think he is a great filmmaker, and he is a filmmaker that, as of filming this video, I've yet to see a film of his where I was like, yeah, not a fan of that. I love all of his work. I think that some might not be masterpieces or great, but he makes from masterpieces, in my opinion, to solid to goodish. So that's pretty admirable. But yeah, that was an honorable mention, Darren Aronofsky. And then next up, we have the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan. No Country for Old Men, Fargo, True Grit. Oh, and The Big Lebowski. Among many others. He is a filmmaker. Well, I should say, they are filmmakers that are just so good. I heard recently they stopped working with each other. I think it was The Tragedy of Macbeth. I think it was only Joel Cohen that worked on that. But still, when they work together, it is incredible. I love that they write their films together, but they just create all these unique characters whilst at the same time having a sensibility with location being very important. Carter Burwell also works with them in terms of the scores, and I think that Carter Burwell working with the Coen brothers just creates movie magic. I love the Coen brothers. I think that they deliver consistent work. Some of their work I'm not too fond of, but for the most part, I think that they create solid to great films. There are several of their films that have made it into my top 100 films of all time, and it makes sense. They're great. I love their humor too. Forgot to mention that. But yeah, Coen brothers. And the last honorable mention, we have another filmmaker similar to Darren Aronofsky, where it almost seems like he's an acquired taste, and that is Terrence Malick. Thin Red Line, Tree of Life, The New World. Terrence Malick, truthfully, I wasn't a big fan of his work when I first came around to him. Like, I think the first time I saw The Tree of Life, I think I shut it off like 15 minutes into it. Just wasn't feeling it. But as I got older, he's a filmmaker that watching his films, I really appreciate the narration, the camera work, just the lighting of his films, how he utilizes a lot of all-natural lighting, which I really admire. And I think the performances are very, not otherworldly, but they are something that feel very much so only in a Terrence Malick film would they work. And I mean that in a good way, because Terrence Malick's style creates such a world that you just can't help but be fascinated by the imagery on screen. And he has so much visual storytelling, so much focus on it, I should say, that when there is narration, it feels earned because he just knows what he's doing. Like, when you watch his films, you can tell he is someone that is in control. That being said, I will say that after The New World, he did have a couple films where it was just people like dancing in a circle and just like, I wasn't a big fan of. But I do think that he is someone that, even though he had a couple films after The Tree of Life that I wasn't the biggest fan of, he is still a filmmaker that I will consistently be looking forward to whatever he brings about, because he is someone that he doesn't make films often, but when he does, it's usually something special. I love Terrence Malick, and that was my last honorable mention. So now, guys, without further ado, let's get the nitty-gritty top 10. So to kick things off with the top 10, we have my number 10, which is Wes Anderson. Grand Budapest Hotel, Fantastic Mr. Fox, and of course, Moonrise Kingdom. So similar to Darren Aronofsky, Wes Anderson is a filmmaker that I have yet to see a film of his where I was like, yeah, I didn't like that. Don't get me wrong, something like Bottle Rocket I think is rock solid, and then something like French Dispatch, I tried to rewatch a second time and I did finish it, but I didn't love it, but I still thought it was solid. And Asteroid City, it did take me, truthfully, a second viewing to really have that film click. But still, Wes Anderson is a filmmaker that when you watch a frame of his, you can immediately tell this is a Wes Anderson film. And I so admire that about him as a filmmaker. He has such great style that really implements storytelling that is very focused, characters that are very focused on their goals, and dialogue that is just so clever. And then at the same time, there's a thematic deceptiveness to his films that I really admire. Something like Grand Budapest Hotel, my favorite comedy of all time. I mean, it's a film that's all whimsical, all hilarious, but then you get to the ending and it's actually like, oh wow, that was kind of a gut punch. But then you look back at the film and you're like, okay, this was set up from the beginning. Which I really admire. So Wes Anderson, I love him. He's a filmmaker. I consistently look forward to whatever he produces. And yeah, he's a great filmmaker. Might not be for everyone because he is, again, quirky, but I really like him, and that's why he's my number 10. Next up, my number 9, my t-shirt. My number 9 is Sergey Leon, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, and of course, Once Upon a Time in America. So, Sergey Leon is similarly to like Terrence Malick. He's a filmmaker that didn't make that many films. I think he made less than 10. And he worked for, I think it was, 3-4 decades? So, he was a filmmaker that worked in the industry for quite a long time, but didn't really make that many. So it just goes to show that he was all about quality, because whenever he had a film come out, it was like a masterpiece. I mean, Once Upon a Time in the West, I think it's a masterpiece. Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. All three of these, they're all masterpieces. He is just someone that is so meticulous with what is produced on screen that I can't help but fall in love with. I love how he utilizes a lot of extreme close-ups. Of course, he has an Ennio Morricone score in each of his films that really, really work. And there's just so much emphasis on production design that really makes the films come alive. I love his work as a director. And yeah, he was a consistently great filmmaker. And yeah, that's why he is my number 9. Next up, my number 8. We have the filmmaker that for a long time was my favorite, but of course that changed. My number 8 is Christopher Nolan. Memento, The Prestige, The Dark Knight. So he is a filmmaker that some of his work went from like near masterpieces to me thinking that they're just good. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, over time, your opinion on a filmmaker can change in terms of their work. And that was definitely the case with Nolan's work. Specifically, something like Tenet or Insomnia. Those are films that, upon rewatching, I didn't like them quite as much. But a lot of his other works, such as these three, are films that I consistently watch and I consistently say, yeah, that's masterful. It's incredible. I really like Christopher Nolan, how he has a lot of ambitious ideas and then also an emphasis on shooting on film. He is a filmmaker that shoots on film and it creates such an immersive experience. Also, of course, he works a lot with Hans Zimmer. Well, I should say did. Now he works with Ludwig Göransson. And he just creates such interesting characters. I know that's probably a hot take because I know some people are like, oh, I don't like the characters of Nolan films. I disagree. I think that he creates characters that are really fascinating. Like, for example, Memento, I love the journey that Leonard goes on. He's just a director that is so good. I will say that in terms of his films, sometimes the exposition sticks out like a sore thumb. But for the most part, I do like how he delivers the exposition in his films. And yeah, I think he's a great filmmaker. And yeah, that's why he's my number 8. Next up, my number 7. This was the filmmaker that I mentioned where I filmed the ranking video, but I think it's coming out late 2024. And my number 7 is Park Chan-wook. So Park Chan-wook is a filmmaker that I, of course, saw Oldboy, and I immediately loved Oldboy. And I said to myself, let me watch some of this director's other work. And so, of course, I saw The Handmaiden, and I loved that. I thought that was a masterpiece. And then I started watching more of Park Chan-wook's films. And I just realized that he is a director that not only delivers subversive stories, but he creates so many twists and turns that not only work on first viewing, but they work on multiple viewings. And he creates such thematic richness that I can't help but love what he does. He's also a filmmaker that has created a masterpiece in each decade. In the 2000s, he has Oldboy. In the 2010s, he has The Handmaiden. And 2020s, he has Decision to Leave. He has such a way with directing. I love his work. I will say this, though, and I want to give the caveat of his first couple films are not good. They're not. But he's also buried them so that when you look him up as a filmmaker, you don't even really know that of his first 2 films because they're so hard to find. I have seen them and they are not good. But when you take those 2 first films out of the mix, everything that came after that is great. Stoker is something that I didn't love, but I still greatly admire, and I do think that it was an endeavor into American filmmaking that he did a pretty good job with. I mean, it is quite an entertaining film, but it doesn't match the greatness of his other films. But still, he is a director that just, my goodness, he is a gift to us as film viewers. I mean, holy cow, he is great. I would highly recommend him. Also, I emphasized Oldboy, but this trilogy that I own, I would also recommend Lady Vengeance and Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. I think both of those are great too. But yeah, enough Park Chan-wook. I think he's great. Check him out as a filmmaker if you haven't done so already. But yeah, that's my number 7. Next up, my number 6, we have, of course, the king of cinema. My number 6 is Martin Scorsese. Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, Last Temptation of Christ. So Martin Scorsese is a director that there are some of his films that I'm not as big of a fan of as necessarily some of his other work. Specifically some of his early stuff. Like, I think Mean Streets is rock solid, but I know some people love that film. Maybe I'll rewatch it, maybe it will hit where it's like, oh yeah, upon rewatch, it's a great film. But there are so many films of his that I absolutely adore. And I think that he is someone that, similar to some of the other directors I mentioned, like Park Chan-wook, he creates great films with each decade. Like, when you look at each time period, you're like, okay, so Scorsese, he did a great film, Taxi Driver, in the 70s. You have Raging Bull. And, of course, you have Last Temptation of Christ in the 80s. In the 90s, you have Goodfellas. I think it's quite good. I know a lot of people love that film. And then 2000s, you have something like The Departed. 2010s, you have something like Shutter Island, which I know some people for some reason don't like, but I like it. And then Hugo, Wolf of Wall Street. And then 2020s, he has, of course, how could we forget Killers of the Flower Moon? I mean, come on. He is someone that just consistently brings about great films. And I think that whenever it is that he passes, it's going to be a shame, because he really did a lot for cinema. He really did. I think that he is a great filmmaker, and yeah, that's why Martin Scorsese is my number 6. And now, guys, we get into the nitty-gritty top 5. So my number 5, we have Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, yet another director where each decade he makes great films. You have something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, a masterpiece of the 1980s. Something like Schindler's List, a masterpiece of the 1990s. And then, of course, we have Lincoln, a masterpiece of the 2010s. Steven Spielberg just creates such an immersive experience when watching his work. I love the world building of his films. I love the attention to detail of his costume designs, the John Williams scores that are consistent in his films. I mean, he is someone that when I see the words Steven Spielberg, directed by Steven Spielberg, in a trailer, I'm there. He's apparently remaking Bullet, and I'm like, remaking Bullet? Why? But I'm like, at the same time, it's Steven Spielberg, so I'm going to be there day one. I love Steven Spielberg. I think that he is someone that when you look at I think he's done 20 plus films. When you look at his work and just all that he's brought to the film industry, it's incredible, man. It really is. He is someone that is knowingly creating a blockbuster, but at the same time, he puts so much care, so much effort that it's not just spectacle for spectacle's sake. Something like Jaws is not just a spectacle. It is a careful character study that has so much motivation going through these characters, and at the same time, so much richness with the messages. And at the same time, when watching his films such as Jaws, I can't help but admire the filmmaking, the craft that goes into it. I love Spielberg. I really do. And yeah, that's why he's my number 5. Next up, my number 4. This is a director that his work is interesting. There's no question about it. His work is so fascinating. My number 4 is Paul Thomas Anderson. There Will Be Blood, Boogie Nights, The Master. So I think what's interesting about Paul Thomas Anderson is that not only does he have many films that I think are masterpieces, such as these 3 films, and then, of course, something like Punch Drunk Love. But what's really fascinating is that when you look at something like Punch Drunk Love onwards, pre-Punch Drunk Love, he very much so was inspired by Martin Scorsese, from the camera work, camera work that's consistently moving, the soundtracks, choices that he would utilize, even the huge ensemble casts. And I love those films. I love something like Boogie Nights, something like Magnolia. Hard Eight, I even think, is rock solid. It's just great to see those films. But then you get the Punch Drunk Love, and he very much so is focused on art house storytelling, having the camera work be still, having it be where there's a lot of visual storytelling. So something like Punch Drunk Love, and then being hit with There Will Be Blood, and then being hit with The Master, it's amazing. It really is. He is a filmmaker that has evolved a lot, and despite me thinking Licorice Pizza was just solid, I still can't help but really admire how he's really come about as a filmmaker in a way to where you can split his filmography and see where he was when he was really inspired by Scorsese and then inspired by more art house-like directors. It's great. I love him as a director. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is very fascinating. I loved watching all his films because I was really able to study him as a filmmaker and see what inspired him, but then at the same time just really see that he is a director that is able to create art, but at the same time, entertainment. Because something like There Will Be Blood, it is quite the experience. One of my favorite films of all time. Well, all 3 of these are. And yeah, I love Paul Thomas Anderson. And that's why he's my number 4. Next up, my number 3, we have David Lynch. Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet, Eraserhead. David Lynch is not for everyone. And I know I've said that about certain other directors like Wes Anderson, but David Lynch really is not for everyone. He is, I would argue, the king of weird in terms of film directors. And I mean that in the best of ways. Like, he is the director that when someone says, hey, what's a weird film that I can watch? You can just pull up David Lynch's filmography and say, hey, you want to watch someone have to deal with fatherhood by dealing with like a mutant baby? I got something for you. Or, hey, you want to watch Blue Velvet where it's like, someone finds like a severed ear and it's like, he ends up going down the rabbit hole of how there's a lot of things underneath the suburban lifestyle that's under there. You want to see something like that? Like, his films are not normal. Even his normal film like Dune is still weird. It's very weird. And I'm saying this as a positive. He is someone that, again, he is the entry to weird cinema. And I love that about him. I really do. Again, not for everyone. Not for everyone. I would say his most accessible film, that's hard to say. Maybe Mulholland Drive, honestly. Oh, actually, no. I take that back. Mulholland Drive, no. I would not say that. I don't know. Maybe The Elephant Man. But he's a filmmaker that I love his work. I really do. I think that he is great. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say about him. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of weird, though, watch David Lynch's films. He's great. Yeah, that's why it's my number 3. Next up, my number 2. This is great filmmaker. My number 2 is Stanley Kubrick. 2001: A Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange, The Shining. So I ranked all of Stanley Kubrick's films. I think at this point it was 4 years ago. And I said it in my video, and I still to this day stand by it. Stanley Kubrick's films really, in terms of my ranking at least, really depends on my mindset. Because there are some times where I'm like, yeah, Clockwork Orange I think is better than 2001: A Space Odyssey. And sometimes I'm like, no, 2001: A Space Odyssey is better. And then sometimes I'm like, no, The Shining is better than all 3 of those. It really just depends on my mood. But what I love about Kubrick as a filmmaker is that he really, really was so fascinated with technology, and at the same time had it where the humans in his films were very much so, not robotic, but they were characters that were more so about the themes and ideas that Kubrick was trying to get across. But I think that in doing so, it aged so well because those characters are now individuals that you can't forget about. You really can't. Someone like HAL 1000. He is someone that in 2001: A Space Odyssey, you can't get out of your mind. Even though he is just a computer, you can't get him out of your mind because of what Kubrick did, like how he directed the actor. I think that Kubrick did such a great job behind the camera. And I also admired how he utilizes a lot of soundtrack choices that are right up my alley, so to speak, like how in Clockwork Orange there's a lot of Beethoven. I really, really admire how he would have soundtracks that worked really, really well with what he was going for in each film. He is also a filmmaker that his first 2 films aside, I think that each of his films were from really good to masterful. He is a great, great filmmaker. If you want to study film, watch any of Stanley Kubrick's films, except his first 2. He is a filmmaker that was just really great, really great. And yeah, I love him, and that's why he's my number 2. And last but not least, my number 1, guys. If you're close to me, you know already my number 1. But my number 1 is David Fincher. Gone Girl, Social Network, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. David Fincher, in my opinion, has only one film of his that I didn't really like, and that was Alien 3. But truthfully, that film wasn't even really his fault because the studio, from what I understand, took that film away from him. So when watching it, you can see slight variations of the style that we would all know and love of Fincher. But watching the film, for the most part, it does feel like a studio movie, and that at the same time doesn't really feel Fincher-esque. And at the same time, it's also just not really an interesting film. But after that, and he made 7 onwards, 7 is great. It's a masterpiece. And of course, something like The Game I quite liked. From then onwards, he made great films. I loved The Killer. I saw that recently, a couple weeks ago, and I thought that was great too. Like, that's a simple film, but it's done so, so well. The amount of expertise filmmaking that is on display with his films is just incredible. He hijacks your senses in such a way that when you put on a Fincher film, you can't help but be immersed with his work. And I love that about him. He's also recently, I would say in the last decade or so, he works with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross in terms of the scores. And I think that it is a winning combination. Love the cinematography of his films. He is also a filmmaker that shoots digitally. And for the most part, a lot of these filmmakers I mentioned shoot on film. And I love that. I love when filmmakers shoot on film, especially since not many do that these days. But Fincher is like the one director where it's like he's shooting digitally. I don't care because he still makes it look so, so great. So I give him a pass for it. Digital filmmaking can look good when in the right hands. And Fincher consistently shows that when he's making a film, it's in the right hands. So yeah, Fincher, he's my number one. And yeah, my favorite filmmaker as the filming of this video, which is November of 2023. But yeah, guys, that is my top 10 favorite film directors of all time. Let me know your top 10 favorite film directors of all time in the comment section down below. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, if there was a filmmaker that you didn't see on this list, check my director playlist. It might be a filmmaker that I just haven't seen all their work yet. So that being said, guys, I really do appreciate you guys watching. Don't forget the subscription, notification bell, follow me down Letterboxd, and I will catch you guys later.